Hi, Book 2. Welcome to Jackie's Literary Corner. This is Jackie, and this is my review of The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. Now, I was introduced to this book via my friend Terry. We had watched the animated movie that came out in the 80s. It was one of her favorite movies. In fact, she had just realized that earlier this year when we were talking about it, she had realized that she had never read the book before, so I actually bought her both the book and the most recent. I think it's either a sequel or a book set in the same world as The Last Unicorn for a Christmas gift for her. So I decided, I liked the movie, thought it was really fun and really cute, so I would try reading the book, but I didn't want to buy the book. So I decided to see if I could get it on audiobook, and it was there on Libby. So I didn't physically read it, but I did listen to it. So in case by chance you don't know what this is about, this is the story of a unicorn who, after overhearing a conversation from these hunters, these travelers, she learns that she is the last of her kind. And she decides now to go on a search for her kind and if they are still alive. And she finds out that they actually have been captured by this mysterious beast known as the Red Bull. And goes on, and accompanying her is an incompetent magician who is immortal. He wants to be immortal. And this middle-aged woman who works for a bunch of bandits who has always wanted to see a unicorn since she was a child. And they go on this quest together and to find out the Red Bull is connected to this villainous King Haggard. And this witch had cursed him and his kingdom. So the village people that live outside of his kingdom, basically they are wealthy, but they are trapped in their village. But the catch is that King Haggard actually a hero could potentially break the curse that is upon King Haggard and his people, but he might not want that curse broken because it might be connected to him and the Red Bull. Oh, I enjoyed this. I mean, I did enjoy the cartoon. It was enjoyable to watch. So I probably, I assumed I would enjoy the book, and I did. I would say that I don't feel as strongly or as passionately as people who grew up with the story. But I do, like I said, I thought it was a very good, very sweet story. It's like very fairy tale-esque. And it has these themes about what it means to be human. And it also has this and it also feels a very sorrowful story. Because this unicorn is the last of her kind. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what that would feel like. Although I'd be really interested to get a story, because you get stories like that before where you're the last of your kind. Like, imagine, like, there's in real life there are a lot of animals that become extinct, and the idea, that we as humans, the scientists will find the one remaining of that animal, and we'll, or there's always the fear, even if they haven't completely been extinct, they are still, they're coming very close. I mean, it's a very terrifying prospect. And and in a way, I was just, what came to mind actually was, I was thinking about, if someone did a story where you were the last human, And I think there have been stories like that, like science fiction stories. And then, but the one that came to mind was actually, and it's not like we're dealing with the last human, but Planet of the Apes. I was thinking about that story. Um, Although Mark Wahlberg's character, and I'm talking about the newer ones. I have not seen the original where he wasn't the last of his kind. He wasn't the last human. But I do believe that there are science fiction stories that kind of deal with that. So it's an interesting and like scary concept to think about, and it's a sad concept to think about. And I definitely felt for the unicorn. I felt very sympathetic towards her. But then there were times when her lack of humanity was frustrating and annoying because she wasn't very sympathetic to the other characters all the time. And then her, like, at one point, Mendrick, he's the magician, has to save her from the bull. The bull is going to kill her, or take her to imprison her. And he saves her life by turning her into a human, which it's his magic. He can't. That's one of the things that makes him an incompetent magician. Is his magic is very limited to unless he digs like really deep and really harnesses, and maybe at the root of it is having really strong emotions, because a lot of times whenever I see fantasy stories with characters that are learning how to use magic, often there are emotions involved, like in Charmed, for instance. So it seems like he's a terrible magician. He's incompetent, but there are times when he can do magic, and he turns her into human, and it makes her depressed because she's trapped in this human body, and now she's gonna get old and die. And yes, that is sad. She was a more beautiful, immortal creature and everything, and she could live forever. But then part of me kind of was like, he did save your life, and being human is not that bad. And we as humans can appreciate life. When you're immortal, maybe when you're immortal, granted, I don't know, I'm obviously not immortal, but I feel like if you're immortal, then you can't really appreciate life because you're never gonna die. There are ways you can die, like someone could kill you or something, but you're never gonna get old, or you'll get old and mentally and emotionally, but physically you won't get old. You will never die of old age. But I feel like being human and being mortal allows you to appreciate that, to live life, like as Tim McGraw's song says, live like you're dying. And our lives are messy and complicated, and I think this book does explore that. And you have a lot of these characters that are very complicated and very messy. You have Spendrick, who is a terrible magician, and he's kind of selfish. He can be very selfish at times because, he is he gets very disgruntled and annoyed when she doesn't appreciate that he saved her life. And on the one hand, as I just said, I'm kind of thinking I'm thinking along his lines of, he just saved your life, and all you can do is let yourself be, upset because you're human, all of a sudden you're trapped in this mortal body. You can't at least be a little appreciative that you are alive. But then, of course, this bull had her in his power, so, at that point she was probably ready to surrender because she's just tired. But then, and, he doesn't appreciate, but at the same time, she has a point of view too, and like I said, you can sympathize. I'm not saying I don't sympathize with her, I do. I feel for her. She's trapped in a mortal body. She's not used to it, and it's probably feels like she's in a cage now at the time. And he's not taking the time. First, he's not taking the time to appreciate that. But then, he start to feel guilty, and he is kind of thinking of his, I was confused about one aspect of how it's pointed out that if something happens to the unicorn, his immortality is tied to hers or something. I did not understand that part. Um, but yes, but then, like, on the one hand, he was, he could be selfish, but on the other hand, he did feel guilt and feel for her, and, he wasn't always sensitive to the other characters' feelings. And could also get jealous easily, like, the woman that they meet that was with the bandits, Molly Grew, because she's a girl, she's a female, she has a stronger connection to the unicorn. And I think he is a little jealous of that, of her relationship to the unicorn. And of course it's, makes it a little bit more complicated, and makes it a little more messy when he turns the unicorn into a human woman, and Molly Grew's like, "What's wrong? What did you do to her?" And she's very upset, and it's like, "How could you do that?" But then and Molly Grew's always hard on him and giving him, is always messing with him and stuff, and it has that element of, male, man versus woman kind of thing of they don't like their butting heads, kind of all that, which sometimes I'm like, why does it have to be, a man and woman, in competition with each other? I mean, why can't they just realize they can complement each other, they can balance each other out? But then, that's an easy conflict to do. So, and just a natural conflict too that could come out of this, situations like this. And there are other times where I think he should be a little, that Schmendrick could be a little more sensitive. And yes, by the way, that is his name, Schmendrick. I think that's a little bit of, I kind of agree with our reviewers that it's a bit of a silly name, but I think that was the point, to give him a silly name. I think, like, Beagle was trying to make a message with that, like, make a point with that, because, like with I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons, I think that Beagle was doing commentary on fairy tales and the tropes of fairy tales. Like, throughout the book, Schmendrick refers to them being, like, characters in a fairy story, and they each have a role to play, including the prince, who they meet, and I was not crazy about the prince. He kind of annoyed me. I mean, like, he was just a typical, like, I mean, hopefully, he was just kind of a typical pretty boy, like, kind of a, I can't think of a better word, but kind of a loser. But then he ended up being, like, he was, he was in his own way incompetent, because he didn't know how to, when he falls for the unicorn in her human form, Malthea, I think. I mean, I always thought they were saying Althea, but I think it's Malthea with an M. He falls for her and becomes obsessed with her and trying to prove himself, because before he didn't care, but then he falls in love with her and wants to impress her, so he tries to impress her with feats of her bravery, and he's slaying dragons and stuff, like, in other various feats, and trying to bring their heads as a token. Hey, I slayed this beast for you, and he clearly doesn't get it. That's not going to impress her, because first of all, she herself, now granted he doesn't know that, she's not even human. And at first, I mean, she's in this depressed state where she's just trapped in this human mortal form. A form that's not natural to her. Which, yes, before anyone tells me in the comments, I understand that's why, I understand her tragedy of being trapped in this mortal form, and it's not her natural form. It's like if, someone turned me into, like, a dog or something, that would, that would be very hard to cope with, and I would be depressed too. I acknowledge that. I mean, I'm just thinking she should have a little more humanity, or a little sympathy towards, should be a little more forgiving of Schmendrick, I think. Like, it's not like he did it out of spite he did it to save her life. And then it's actually, and it makes sense, of course. It's another woman who kind of, Molly Grew, who helps him be like, you need to get a clue here. That's, you're not, clearly this is not working. You're not impressing her with this. You know, and it's the typical, like, we don't know, the opposite sex doesn't understand the other situation and doesn't, we all think we know what will impress the person we're interested in, but then it doesn't work because we don't know, we're not taking the time to get to know them and to understand them. And that's Prince Lear's problem. He's not really trying to understand her and figure out and try to get inside her head and understand, okay, what would really get her attention? What would she genuinely like? We're so focused on impressing that person that we don't consider what they want, what would genuinely please them. We're just thinking what we think would please them. And of course he's getting this from, other princesses like this, so of course she would like it. But we're individual, everyone's an individual. Even the unicorn, Malfia, she is an individual. She has wants and needs and desires. She has likes and dislikes because she is her own person. And it is Molly Grew has to point that out to Prince Lear. And which later on he does get the message and they do fall in love, which is kind of it's a tragic love story. Because she's, eventually they have to save the other unicorns. And they gotta decide what they're gonna do. And they're trying, Molly and Schmendrick know what they have to do. That they might have to break them apart. So it makes it very tragic for them because she ends up coming around to him. So Molly, we've talked about a little bit about Schmendrick. Now let's talk about Molly. I do like that she's very, like, hard person and very tough and very sassy, and like you said, I think she's a little hard on Schmendrick, and she does, like, there is a brief moment where she does, because she does defend him. She's like, he saved your life. She could at least show some appreciation when she's talking about how miserable she is in her current situation. And she also sets her straight, like, tells her, okay, give Lear a chance. He's not a bad guy. He's a nice guy and he's fallen in love with you. So give him at least give him some hope that, you could come around and at least be friends with him. Which kind of backfires a little bit, though. Because, like I said, the romance between Lear and Malfia is very tragic. It's a very tragic situation. I still kind of, got annoyed with her and thought she was a little judgmental at times. But I also appreciate, and also, I felt like I understood her frustration that, when she's a little girl, she was like, always want to see a unicorn, prayed to see a unicorn, and then finally she sees one, and she's not in the best position. Like, she's an old lady now. She's been held captive by these bandits, and so of course I understand her frustration, being like, what the hell, now you show up, now after all this time you show up and reveal yourself to me? Of course the unicorn, she doesn't understand. She's like, she doesn't understand humans' emotions. She's just like, well, I'm here now. I'm sorry, but, it's, because of course we're, I feel like it's a rule that it's very rare for us to actually see a real unicorn. And not just because they're so rare now, but when they weren't rare, it was probably just because, we weren't going to necessarily see them. They would always go hide, like, or would only reveal, like, hint that we were there, but then they would disappear. Now, as far as the bad guy goes, Haggard, well, there were kind of a couple antagonists. Not just Haggard and the Red Bull, but there's also the old woman the old witch who ran which was probably more of a hedge witch, as they say, that this carnival that the unicorn gets trapped. She gets held captive there, and that was she's creepy and intimidating, and a typical greedy villain who wants to exploit. She's very selfish and was using them and trapping them. And it was horrible seeing, like, even though some of these creatures could be dangerous, it was horrible to see some of them get held captive. Like, I definitely was on the unicorn side on that one, seeing them in prison. And then this woman, of course, was tricking these people into thinking that she has all these magic creatures when really she only has two. And it's just horrible, and I hated her. Hated her guts. But I think most people would not like her. But it was the idea was, really interesting as far as story goes. This woman using, because it's just, you see that in the real world. Even these modern times, people exploit, whether it's human or animals, all the time. It's still happens today, just in a different form. So I think that kind of talks to something that is common, that happens all the time still. Exploiting something for money, and for just because you're greedy and selfish, and the people like the macabre and grotesque, and things that they can't explain, and or things that are just crazy and unbelievable. So now, but the main villains are King Haggard and the Bull. And it was interesting because Haggard felt a lot more human than we think. Like, he was a human that was just, he was bitter and miserable about his life, and he didn't want anything that could bring joy or anything that could bring strong emotions. He's just very angry and bitter person, and just ruined the lives of these people, dragged Lear and the village people down with him. Although it was the village people, I do agree with Molly Crew, they were selfish, but they were also natural and human, and very human response of what could we have done. That kind of response of this, like, it's not, in their defense, it's not easy to stop someone or something so powerful and terrifying, and it's human to be selfish and to not want to interfere out of fear. And they kind of benefited from the situation. Even though they were cursed, they did benefit in the sense that they had a bountiful harvest. They were just trapped in their village. They couldn't, so it was a weird curse. It was like, on the one hand, they did benefit, but they were still trapped. Which those are the most interesting curses, is the ones where you still, in a way, there are good aspects to the curse that traps you, but in the end, you are trapped. It's a gilded cage, essentially. But anyway, back to King Haggard. So he was an interesting villain because he was miserable, but he was also kind of crazy and very angry and bitter. Just that he's a familiar archetype villain that you see, where he's like, you almost pity him because you know that he's probably unhappy, but then he's so selfish and greedy and just does not want to give up the power that he has. So he's willing to sacrifice joy and happiness just to keep power. And it's like, you pity him. You're like, you could have this great life, yet you are so afraid of not having power that you just would rather sacrifice your happiness, real, genuine happiness. Like, he doesn't want anything that could bring, anything that could bring, light into his world. Make, like, he just wants to, and he wants to drag everyone down with him. Like I said, I pity him. I pity his character as a villain. As for the Red Bull, the Red Bull is definitely scary and very intimidating, and just, this thing that could charge at you, and you don't know who's in control, King Haggard or the bull. That it's like, if King Haggard, he could probably lose control, and the bull he could be just as much danger as the bull as the unicorns or the humans. And I think he's a little cocky. He doesn't think, but I also wonder if, like, he wants to die in the end, if that's part of why he's so miserable, because he's been around long enough that he would want to die. But because a lot of times you see that with those kinds of characters, where they want to eventually die, but they're too scared and they're selfish. Anyway, the Red Bull, back to the Red Bull. So he's very intimidating, not very complex because it's an animal. He's an animal, and it's not like he becomes human or anything like the unicorn. He's just this very powerful beast that I imagine would be probably scarier for children. As far as, not like, but still, like, when you read it, I think it would be, if you just let yourself get lost in the story, I think it could still be scary, but probably, again, I feel like the Red Bull would be more scary for kids. I mean, also, I do know what's going to happen, so it probably took away some enjoyment for me, because I've seen the animated movie, so I know how things turn out for the characters. But I do appreciate one of the perks of reading the book, or listening to the book in my case, is that there's stuff that they couldn't put in the movie. Even though the book is not, it doesn't feel like it's that long. They couldn't put it into a 2-hour movie, include everything. But then I'm not a good judge of how that would work and everything. But there were, like, the bandits. I think a lot of the bandit stuff was not included in the movie, so that was really fun. Like, you had these characters that were trying to be like Robin Hood and his merry men, and they were, I don't think they were in the movie. I have to check, because I'm trying to remember, because they include the tree part, the tree that falls in love with Schmendrick. They do have that part. So don't take my word for it, because it has been like a little over a year since, maybe more than that, a few years since I've actually watched the anime movie. But I do believe there are parts in the anime movie, or parts in the book, that weren't in the anime movie yet, but I'm not sure if this was one of them. But I don't think it was the part with the bandits. Which I did kind of feel bad for them, because they were trying to be like, Robin and his merry men, and the part with them was they were talking about legends and why some become legends and others don't, and like they explore that with these characters. And the bandits, I don't think they weren't that bad. They were actually, kind of sad and pathetic, but funny too. Like, very funny characters. And there was actually where Schmendrick surprised them and conjures up Robin Hood and his merry men and Maid Marian. That was kind of a funny moment. Also, the thing about the tree thing, the tree fall in love with Schmendrick, it was just kind of mentioned. But it's kind of funny that it got a little weird. The way they animated it got a little weird in the anime movie. If you haven't seen the anime movie, I distinctly remember it being, like, really weird. A very weird element, and maybe it was because of the 80s, I don't know, but it was just, when the tree falls in love with him, the animation was kind of crazy, and it just got weird. It was just weird, and, I could see watching it, I'll make you uncomfortable. But anyway, let's see. What else can I talk about with this? Yeah, I guess that's really it. All I want to say. I mean, I'm glad I listened to the audiobook. It wasn't, like, the best thing ever, but I'm happy with listening to it. I'm glad I actually consumed the book. Because I feel like I want to say I read it, but then people were like, well, technically you didn't read it. So yes, I listened to it, and yes, I realize I'm exercising a different muscle, but I still consume the story. So yes, I feel like I have to clarify that I consumed it in a different way rather than reading the words myself. Narrator was great. It was a woman. I cannot remember her name off the top of my head, but she did a good job, I think. And it was a very enjoyable story. Like I said, I don't have nostalgic feelings for it like people like my friend Terry would have. I would be curious what she thinks of the book. If she does, if Terry, you come across this video and see this review, and maybe you can tell me one if you remember if the bandits, or anyone else who's read the book and seen the adaptation, you could remind me what was in the adaptation, what wasn't, because I'm pretty sure there was stuff that was in the book that was not in the adaptation. I just don't know if it was the parts I'm thinking of. Oh, by the way, also I like the harpy. The harpy was kind of cool. And the animation was really. I actually really like the animation of the adaptation. It's very old school, but it was really. It looked like a painting. It looked like very much like artwork. But anyway, so if you guys are, if you guys are familiar with the story with The Last Unicorn, let me know, and see if you've read the book, whether you've listened to it or actually physically read it, or if you've seen the adaptation. I mean, I think it's a really good story, and I think listening to it is kind of would be perfect, because it's like a fairy tale, which originally stories were told orally anyway. So a lot of fairy tales were originally told orally. So I think listening to it would be great. A great, very fun, very like nostalgic. Even if you didn't grow up with The Last Unicorn, it could still instill nostalgic feelings. So, I hope you liked this video and liked my review of The Last Unicorn, and I will talk to y'all later. Alright, bye!